Okay, welcome back. I'm getting to the point of finishing up framing. You guys have already seen this photo, but I have a couple other examples that are not on Flickr that I'd like to show you, and more creative ideas for frames to kind of get your creative juices flowing. So you can use things like mirrors, holes in walls, things like that, things that might reflect your own image or reflect other images. You can use doorways, archways, things like that. With something like this, you need to make sure that if somebody's in a doorway or a window, they need to be inside, not in front of. So, like this guy is standing inside the arch, he's framed, but then when he's kind of outside the arch, he's not so much framed. So you have to make sure they're either behind the structure or like right inside. You cannot have them standing out front. They will not be considered framed. You can literally use a frame to create a framing photo if you want. Or you can use hands if you want to. Choice is yours. Like I said, you can find cutaways, doorways, things like that. Or you can have a frame, inside 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 a frame, blah, blah, blah. So, those are some examples of framing. So, good luck with that. And next up, oops, you're not supposed to see that page. Aha! Next up, let's talk about leading lines. Now, this one I've pointed out in class more often than I have frames, because I see leading lines a lot in people's homework, whether you intend to do it or not. Sometimes you accidentally get a good leading line, and I will always point that out to you. So, here we have an example of leading line, and the leading line here would be the staircase, right here. The idea of a leading line is something that creates a line that automatically brings your viewer's eye into the photo and kind of takes them through the photo and then kind of dumps them off somewhere inside your photo. The idea is to bring the viewer into the photo and kind of leave them there so that they can look around a little bit. You do not want your lines to be able to go from one end to the other and then dump off. You should always have something to kind of stop them and leave them inside the photo. And for the most part, the biggest rule with leading lines is leading lines can come from, let me shut that off real quick. Leading lines can come from the bottom corner, the bottom edge, kind of lower bottom here, and lead you in diagonally. They can come in from the top edges and lead you in diagonally. Sometimes you might, well, most of the time the thing you will not have is you do not have lines go side to side. They usually come in somewhere from the lower bottom or the upper bottom and lead you into the photo. So here we have a nice road, a nice highway, and you see that the lines here is a bunch of actual lines, one big line and then a bunch of smaller ones. The lines bring you in from the bottom edge, and then they take you kind of into the middle of the photo. And because of this lovely tree here, it kind of stops that line, so that you're not being dumped off the side. You can kind of stay here and take a break and check out the rest of the photo along the way. So keep in mind that type of thing. Now, if you're going to do something like roads, I ask that you do not drive and do this. If you have to get a leading line and you're driving, then I would say pull your car over, get out of the car. Don't do this while you're driving. Be a passenger. And do not, under any circumstances, stand in the middle of an empty road, or not empty road, but a busy road, or the median of a busy road and try to get leading lines that way. That's the quickest way to get run over. And so I'm going on record now as telling you that I am not telling you to go stand in the middle of a road. Now, if you live in a place like I do, I live in a subdivision, and my particular street is not very busy. So, I can stand out in the middle of my street, and I can take a photograph down my street and use it as a leading line. I can even lay down in the street. Because number one, I don't have a lot of traffic, and number two, if I do, I'm in a subdivision. They're not driving very fast. I have plenty of time to see a car coming, get up and get out of their way. So don't go onto busy streets and try to get photographs of lines in the middle of the street, because it's just a silly thing to do. Okay, here we have like a bridge, and the bridge here with supports create the line that kind of dump you off in the middle here. So I like that leading line. That's pretty cool. You can use fences. So you have to be really cognizant of where you're standing, making sure that your line starts somewhere in the bottom or in the top. Sometimes you can use your point of view skills to create a really cool line. Sometimes you can see like a street or a fence or something and it's like, yeah, that looks nice, it's an okay enough, it'll pass line. But maybe if you get down a little bit, go along the side, kind of use the point of view thing that we did at the beginning of the semester, you can make it a really interesting looking leading line. Now, your leading lines do not have to necessarily have any perspective to them, but sometimes they will, and sometimes they're more interesting when they do have some perspective, but it's not necessary per se. Now with this photo, there are a lot of things wrong with this photo that drive me crazy. Yes, it's a fence, and yes, it has perspective, and yes, it has leading lines, but it has an extremely shallow depth of field, and that just really does not serve a purpose in terms of leading lines. Because the idea of a leading line is to give your viewer kind of a clear path to follow, for their eye to follow, and give them something to look at, to dump them off in, and to enjoy. And with this photo, you only have a very small strip like right here that stayed in focus, and then it very quickly goes out of focus, and where it dumps you off at is so out of focus that you really can't identify what's at the end there. There's really not a whole lot in this photo to actually enjoy per se. So this is not a good example of a leading line. You do not want to have super shallow depth of field. It will not work for you. You can have a little bit of depth of field, and there's another photo coming up in a minute where we do see toward the end it does get a tad bit blurry, but you'll see the difference hopefully. It's not super blurry. You can still make out details. So with here we have a bunch of lines. We have some very not really in your face assumed leading lines. But the most prominent leading line obviously is right here, this red strip, which kind of stops like dead right there and kind of goes that way, but it basically stops right at where I guess the exit is, where the staircase is. But there are other implied leading lines here. You can see like a line here. The one thing I want to point out is like this railing here. It starts in the middle of the photo, and it's not super long. That is not a leading line. So your lines need to come pretty much from the edge of your photo somewhere in to lead your eyes in. Now, as much as I love this photo, and I do, it is not a very good leading line, specifically because the line starts here, it kind of winds around, and then dumps you off outside of the photo, and we really don't want that. Now, if there would have been like a lighthouse or a house or a boat or something that would have blocked that from continuing all the way to the edge, that would have been a much better leading line. I love this one. This one has great perspective. Great point of view, has lots of lines to kind of draw your eye in, has fantastic perspective in the clouds, so it's a really good example, in my opinion, of a leading line, or lots of leading lines. Now this one is the other fence photo that has a little bit of shallow depth of field. Not really shallow depth of field, it's not. But it does have some blurring toward the end. But if you notice here, like this is nice and crisp. This is a little bit blurrier, but you can still make out all the details. So this one is okay. It's okay to have a little bit of out of focus at one side of your photo, but you want to be able to still make out details. And some people today pointed out that they thought that this created kind of a frame. In a way, it kind of does. I have to agree with them on that. And then one more here. And then here we have a path. So that's a wonderful leading line to lead you through this wonderful garden here. This also has a little bit of framing work going on from the sides. So especially if you had somebody standing here on the path, that would be an even better photo, but it's still a great photo in and of itself. And then I'm going to show you a couple other examples of some creative leading lines. Let's see here. Again, some of these photos you've seen, some of you haven't. Let's go right here to this guy. Let's pull him up. Now here, this is a great example, or a great idea here. I love kind of the leading lines here with the knife and fork. They don't quite touch the edge, but they're close enough now. They're kind of short for a leading line. I would have rather have something that maybe goes a little longer. But this also has some lines in the table that kind of create lines, leading lines, to bring your eye to this lovely guy who looks so happy to have his photo taken. Here we have, again, shallowed up the field, not great. But if you happen to come across like a picnic table, you can use like the slats in a picnic table, the lines in a picnic table to create a leading line. Just have things be more in focus than this particular photo is. Now here we have a leading line that kind of, some of them, a lot of these go side to side. So that kind of breaks the rule that I had talked about, but if you notice, there are other lines that don't necessarily go side to side. They kind of come in from the top and the bottom, so this one is okay. I would accept this completely as a leading line photo. Whoever took this photo, I really wish they would have blacked this part out, but he kind of breaks up the lines, and he has so many lines leading to him. How could you deny this photo as a great leading line photo? Now, if you have like worn-in paths, sometimes you have things, they're not actually lines, which maybe you have kind of like some wearing in grass or a worn-in path or something, you know, gravel line. Now, if she'd have been a little farther up, I would have liked that better. But this worn-in part could definitely be a leading line. Now, this photo is everything that's wrong with the world. I hate this photo. Because it's just awful. This poor lady's skin blends into the wall. She is facing the wrong way. She is cut off. This red line goes side to side. It goes straight through her. She doesn't even block it. That's the really weird thing. Like the other dude, like blocked the lines and kind of stopped him. She doesn't even stop this line. It like goes straight through her from one side of the photo to the other. So just to warn you, don't do things like this. I might not have been so hateful of this photo if maybe they had done the rule of thirds correctly with her. They cut her off, so half of her body is missing. I do love the lines in the wall. Those are fantastic lines. But this red line going straight through her just does not make me happy. So don't do things like that, because that's just sad. This, though, is one of my favorite photos, and I don't know why. It's the weirdest photo, but it has framing as well as leading lines, and I'm not altogether sure. This girl appears to be wearing goggles in a library, and I'm not sure why, and I really don't care, because it's a great photo. I think it's really interesting. It's got lots of color, pattern, some texture, fantastic lines. She's framed by the shelves. Everything about this photo, I just love it. It's really cool. So if you do something like this, I will probably absolutely love your photo. So that is my lecture for tonight. Again, you will be taking two totally different leading line photos. So again, I don't want to see two roads, two sidewalks. Try to get creative and pick two different line photos. Two totally different framing photos. So make sure that what we see in your frame or that's being framed, you can actually see and it's of some interest. So if you're inside and you're shooting through a window, make sure that your window isn't so blown out that we can't see what we're trying to see past the window, because that does happen sometimes, and it's extremely annoying because now you're just framing a big blob of white light, and that's not very interesting. Make sure that you don't have any guttering and that you try to keep sides as even as possible if you can, unless you're going to specifically do rule of thirds, and make sure you specifically do rule of thirds and not just kind of this limbo of kind of rule of thirds, kind of in the middle, kind of not. Try to keep things in focus. And then lastly, your fifth photo will be of wildlife. So remember, no cats or dogs, even feral cats. I don't accept that. I don't accept feral cows. I know that sounds funny, but I have a story about that. Somebody tried to argue with me that they saw a cow on the side of the road that swore up and down was wild because the poor thing looked like it had been through the ringer, but I still think that, you know, it belonged to somebody. Do not take any wildlife photos of lawn statuaries, things like that. No going to Cabela's and taking pictures of the stuffed grizzly bears. That doesn't count. Insects do count. And make sure that you fill your frame about 50% or more of the subject matter. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to text me and I will try to help you out. Hope you guys had a great Halloween, and I'll see you on Monday.